So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Patricia Patricio, and welcome to this webinar of the JoinHealth Spring Series on cybersecurity and blockchain applications in health. If you're joining us for the first time, these webinars are a collaborative initiative of the Health Cluster Portugal and the IT Health, herein represented by Miguel Amador. And they aim to bring awareness over topics of interest in health and promote knowledge and networking. So in today's webinar, we'll hear about the need and the applications of cybersecurity and blockchain to the health sector. We will start with a presentation by Ana Ferreira from Synthesis about security, cybersecurity, and how the pandemic's related events actually reshaped this context. And then we'll have Francisco Maia from SafeCloud talking about data privacy, and Bika van Gork and Jo Vander from Extra Horizon to give us a perspective about security in digital health applications. So thank you very much for accepting this invitation. And today we'll leave the questions from the audience to the end, so we'll condense them in a roundtable after the presentation. So in the meantime, if you have questions, just drop them in the Q&A box and we'll get back to you later on during the roundtable session. As usual, the presentation slides and the recording of the session will be available after the webinar. So if you want to have the slides of the presentations, you can request them by email or adding your email in the survey that we will send you after the webinar. And the recordings will be available on the Health Cluster Portugal's YouTube channel. So moving to the first speaker of this afternoon, Ana Ferreira. She's a cybersecurity specialist and researcher. She holds a master's in information security and a PhD in computer science. And she's currently a researcher at Synthesis and a lecturer at the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Porto. She's also the author of more than 100 scientific publications, and her main research interests include socio-technical security, access control, usability, legislation, risk, and persuasion. So Ana, thank you so much for accepting this invitation. And I would like now to invite you to please start your presentation.
Thank you so much. I'll start by sharing my screen. Okay, I hope you're all seeing it. First of all, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the kind presentation and for the opportunity to be able to share with you some of the work we've been doing. Me and my colleague Ricardo Correia from Synthesis at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Porto. I'm not presenting in detail the results of this work. You can actually access it. It's already published. You can contact us if you want to know a bit more about it, because I'm not able to detail it in this presentation. So the work is entitled COVID-19 and Cybersecurity, Finally an Opportunity to Disrupt. I'll start off by just clarifying some concepts, which I think can be useful for the whole session. So regarding privacy, privacy is actually a fundamental human right. So it's the right for an individual to actually be able to protect their privacy, their personal information, their sensitive data, to know how to control it, who is using it, by what purposes, and so on. While information security, or cybersecurity in this case, are all the measures, techniques, the means, and even the policies that we apply in order to guarantee the privacy. So what we call cybersecurity, or I'd like to call more information security, so it's about protecting security in this case, it may be in the cyberspace, but it also may be in the physical world, focus mainly on three main dimensions. These dimensions are confidentiality, when you try to prevent unauthorized access, integrity, when you try to prevent unauthorized modification, as well as availability. We want the information to be available whenever needed, but obviously to the authorized personnel or to authorized processes. So these are the three main dimensions of security. We say that maybe a system is reasonably secure when we are focusing in a balanced way of these three dimensions. However, there are other dimensions that can complement and should complement these ones. For example, auditing or monitoring, we need to make sure that these are working properly, that we detect problems and we correct them in a timely fashion. So after this very brief information security presentation, I want to go now to the part of healthcare, the healthcare domain. Obviously, healthcare domain has been very attractive to cyber criminals even before the pandemic. Obviously, there have been many attacks. We think the main motivation is the value that each medical record can have in comparison with other kind of information like credit card or bank accounts and so on. And obviously, the pandemics, unfortunately, has exacerbated the attacks and has increased a lot the number of data breaches, and it has mainly focusing on healthcare. So our work tries to kind of discuss these issues and tries to organize in a way which could be the more direct and the more indirect consequences regarding COVID-19 in cybersecurity. The more direct we can say or discuss that could be data sharing or fraud and theft. I'll explain this a bit or discuss a bit longer this one, so I'll leave them for now. But I would like also to present the fact that we have and we already had vulnerable systems in healthcare. So probably they were under budget, not focusing on protecting the privacy of people, under patched probably with not correct configurations, with lack of personnel with the right literacy to actually promote best practices and implement the good technologies to protect these systems. Obviously, the pandemic has put even more pressure in these systems that were probably already not well prepared. And so we have serious cases of this being even more vulnerable. In terms of indirect issues or consequences, people still need to also treat other conditions, other diseases, and they need to do so probably remotely because obviously it was not possible for other people, except for patients with COVID, to go and still put more pressure within the physical world of the healthcare institutions at the time where the pandemic was more in force. So then they would have to find other means. Other means were remotely by teleconsultation or telemedicine, and using even means that probably were not the most secure. Their home infrastructures, we can think about WhatsApp and Facebook. We have in the literature some reference to using these kind of communications. And obviously, since people could not go and treat their diseases, there would be an exacerbation of other emergencies that would also need to be taken care. And all this puts a pressure on the physical integrity and mental integrity of the people. To add to all this, people are at home. They are isolated. They're using what I call the remote everything. So they need to do most of their activities online, using their own infrastructures, which I already mentioned, they're probably not well secure. Maybe people don't really know how to have the least best practices in cybersecurity to promote the best use of these technologies. And also it doesn't help that they have to use these to perform a variety of contexts like teleworking, homeschooling, online shopping, even exercise, even entertaining and even contacting with friends and family, which people, I think they rely, or almost the whole world relied on the digital infrastructures during the highest time of pandemics. And so this obviously creates for the cyber criminals a very good, let's say, cyber surface of attack, an enormous surface of attack to them, with various types of people, with many, let's say, opportunities for them to actually influence and get more benefit. And when we are, unfortunately, there is evidence when we are a lot or a long time online, the risk of performing more risky behaviors and problems obviously increases. And this also, it's not very good. But focusing on one or two aspects, in this case, the aspect of data sharing, obviously within the pandemic, we need to generate more data. We need to treat more patients. But we need to get this data in order to perform better research, to better diagnosis, provide better treatment, to better understand the disease itself, in order to be able also to control the infections, the chain of infection, the contacts that are performed, in order to try to better understand and control the disease. So for this, we need a lot of data, what we call big data, or all the data that we can gather. But obviously, with all this comes also the other part. We need to create a balance between all the data that we collect and process, and obviously, how are we going to protect it? I want to focus on the contact tracing because I'm sure almost or all of you have heard about contact tracing. These have been developed fast among very different countries in order to try to easily and quickly try to trace the chains of infection and control and identify them and try to control them. I'll just focus on a few aspects because obviously there are many aspects relating to this kind of apps. But I'd like to focus on the fact of the balance that we need to maintain between anonymization and data integrity. Of course, we would like all these apps to be anonymous, to be able to actually trace and do all this without having to process our personal and sensitive information. However, this is not possible because even if we have total anonymization, we cannot guarantee data integrity because we don't know whoever added information, if that information is valid or not, if it is correct or not. And then we cannot guarantee and we cannot use that information to provide better treatment and better healthcare decision making. So in this case, we really need to give up some of our privacy, hopefully to a trusted entity that can perform this validation in a better way and be able to provide this kind of balance that we need, and also in a more transparent way. There's also the issue of the people that are using. So each one of us that are trying to interact with this kind of applications that didn't have much time to be tested, to be validated. And so also not all of us are IT or cybersecurity literate, and we can generate even more vulnerabilities when they are interacting with the application. Yes, it is possible because humans are very creative and can obviously create new ways of using things that they were not supposed to use to. And then there is the technical side. I'm not going into the detail. There is many applications use Bluetooth protocol, which some versions have some known vulnerabilities. But I want to really focus on the fact that the Bluetooth protocol is a kind of wireless protocol that can traverse walls. So the boundaries here is there needs to be a balance between what we call the false positives and the false negatives, because if you are not really in physical contact with someone that's probably outside our house or in a car passing by or just stop outside the house, probably this will generate a false positive, which obviously we don't want, because then the information won't be that much valid. But this may make sense as well. For example, if the disease is very infectious, we may want to have more high false positives than false negatives. So it's all it depends really on the objectives we want to use the technology for. But in the end, I think we need to provide this kind of technology is very useful, obviously. We need to obviously to be able to test and validate it if it is usable in what contexts. But for this, we need to create trust in people in their use. So we need to provide more and better risk assessment, more transparency on how the things are done, and make sure that we test it a lot. Hopefully, if we have time to test it a lot before they are released in the wild, let's say. Then I want to talk to you about the other direct consequence, which I think it's one of the worst, let's say, or we think is one of the worst, which is fraud and theft. With the pandemic, this has increased a lot, these kind of attacks, because it's easy to feed on the fear and uncertainty of population who is isolated and who is in a physical location for a long time. Is also performing, or it's on the internet, on the news, on the media, social networks for long periods of time. And obviously with all the disinformation, all the confusion, all the fear that is raised within the people, it makes them more vulnerable targets to this kind of messages. So these have increased a lot in the last year. Phishing sites have increased and pop up in a very incredible rate. And also ransomware attacks. I'm sure you've heard in the news lately that it has been causing a lot of disruption, mass disruption within healthcare institutions. And it has increased a lot since the beginning of last year. So the pandemic has influenced a lot this kind of attacks. And we know that most of them focus on healthcare. So this is a domain that needs really to be taken care of. There's even in the news this month that US wants to give the same priority to ransomware acts, like as the same as the terrorist attacks. So this is becoming really a very big issue. But what is ransomware? Well, I'm sure most of you know, but just briefly, ransomware are attacks that attackers get hold of some personal or private or sensitive data from an organization. And obviously they ask for a ransom back. in order to give back the data. Usually the data may be encrypted, may be hidden, somehow it isn't available. So that third dimension of security is not there. The data is not there anymore to be used when it's needed. And then this obviously in healthcare can be very serious, because either you don't pay and let people die. There has been a case actually last year, which was the first case that is connected with a ransomware hacker of a patient who died. But even if you pay, it's not guaranteed that you'll get the data back and everything as it was supposed to be. So these attacks, I think the attackers had a lot of time on their hands, because they were also isolated at home, and they could organize themselves better and generate an even more disruption. So this is very highly organized attacks. And they have now what we call applied triple extortion. So they not only hide or encrypt the data, but they extract the data, and they start using the data to blackmail the owners of the data. In this case, for example, the patients. They're causing even more disruption, and it's harder to control. And then there is also other side, which is, okay, very strange, but it is part of the legislation, because in some jurisdictions, if you pay to attackers, you can even be fined by the national authorities. So in a way, you have your hands are tied. And then to become even worse, the attackers can, if they get hold of your information, obviously they entered your system, they explored some of your vulnerability. And then they can perform denial of service attacks and still keep you in the table of negotiation in order to get what they want until they want, basically. So I'd like to bring you this kind of issue and focus a bit on this kind of attacks, not only because they are very common now in the media, and especially because they are focused on healthcare, because sometimes we think that these cyber attacks are very sophisticated and they need require a lot of time and resources. Of course, there are those attacks, but these start probably with some phishing email or some phishing link. And then obviously, once they are inside, the attackers can perform more sophisticated and more disruptive attacks. And this is one of them. So in the end, we obviously conclude there is not enough security. It wasn't there before, and obviously with the pandemic, it's not there yet. And the pandemic has not identified or brought new attacks, but in fact, they have been exacerbated a lot. They have become more sophisticated, more disruptive, more targeted. But still, in the end, we are all focusing on getting back to normal. So what is normal in cybersecurity? Like in many other areas, we think that normal is about low budget, lack of awareness, illiteracy, inadequate infrastructures that can really protect people and make them aware of the problems that they have while interacting with the technology. And so technologies that are usually not adaptable to the needs and to the protection of the type of data that needs to be protected. Also normal in the literacy is about that privacy and security are still one of the 7 biggest challenges in human-computer interaction. So what needs changing? Well, everything. Are we ready to disrupt? If we are not, we should be by now. Otherwise, I don't know. So we want just to bring you 2 issues. Like I said, we cannot extend too much the discussion. We'd like to bring 2 issues to the table, which focus mainly on the human side, because cybersecurity is about human behavior. In the end, we cannot say that the human is the weakest link, because it's not. The humans are the ones that can raise the level of cybersecurity that the system needs to have. And so education is essential. We know that sometimes there is some education, and if it exists at all, which most of the times it doesn't, it needs to be online, easy, visual, fast, accurate, meaningful, targeted to the population, so that the people will really understand what it means. I think we have had good examples, at least in our opinion, which has been the fact when related information and the best practice that we have for these pandemics, like how to use the mask or the social distancing. We have seen videos and we have seen lots of infographies and all that, which has been, at least in our opinion, quite good and interesting, because they pass the message quickly, easily, and people get it. Or at least ones that want to get it, they usually get it. I think that could be something good, and it should be something orthogonal. It should be something to all, that reaches all population, because best practices in cybersecurity, as we have seen, is very important, because that's what we are using now. It needs in order to protect ourselves. And then we get to trust. So obviously, education is very important. We need to know the basics of using technology, of interacting with devices. But in fact, people have thrived over thousands of years, and they have increased and developed a lot within societies, not because they are experts in using every single device or have complete knowledge of everything. But in the end, even if everything is there, there's still something that it's not there, and that's something we think it's trust. So they still need to have some kind of trust in order to want to use the technology and use it properly in a continued fashion and the most securable possible. But obviously, trust can be like a feared subject. It can be called subjective, and subjective in computer science is still something that we don't like to hear. But maybe we should, because we should have the courage to do this, because actually trust can happen online. There is evidence that there is some social presence when we actually interact with technology. So maybe we should consider to have some kind of adaptable trust by design within the technology, so that when we are interacting, we can actually verify somehow that there is some sort of trustworthiness within the relations that we are creating in the technology. And maybe this can help in trying to detect and improve the problems relating with social engineering. Within the literature, we know that with the few works that we have relating with trust in computer science and cybersecurity, that it can promote actually the better use of technology and minimize the frequency of security incidents. And they can also explain how relationships develop. You can better understand how things, how the relationship develops, how in different contexts, what kind of factors really influence the user to make a right or a bad decision, let's say. And this can actually be a helpful way of providing a better online security. So I'm almost finishing. I'd like to finish with a question: to trust or not to trust? Obviously, trust is not the solution for everything. We think it can be part of the solution, definitely, and but it's not the only. We can also have the what seems the opposite, like not to trust or zero trust, as it's called now. So we can have both. Maybe in some situations we would like to have trust more to the user side, maybe when interacting with the humans with the technology. But maybe for zero trust, we can also have and be adaptable to the interactions between the devices themselves, like smart IoT and so on. I'm sure Francisco will probably tell you more about this. Maybe we need something that in a way it may look contradictory, but in fact they complement each other. The humans are complex, cybersecurity will be complex, but we need actually to focus on this complexity, to face it, let's say, and try to make the most of it, and be it adaptable, customizable, like we always, and multidisciplinary, like we always try to defend. And then the last message I would like to leave is that the breaches that are being performed now, they will still be exploited in the future, because many of them are still not detected. They will have lots of consequences, and in healthcare, very serious consequences, much longer after the pandemic. And in the end, information security, it's about people. Information security is about protecting the most important asset, which are people. And so we need to focus on trying to do that as best as possible, because anyway, privacy is about protecting the personal information. It's about protecting the sensitive data that we own, but in the end, it's about protecting our physical and mental integrity. So humans in the end. So that's the message I want to leave you with today. And thank you very much for being there and listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna.
No problem.
So it was a very clear introduction to the topic, and thank you for this contextualization within the COVID-19 pandemics, and for raising these important and even provocative questions for further discussion from the audience. So we will now move to Francisco. We'll follow up on this topic from the perspective of data privacy. So Francisco Maia is the co-founder and CEO at Therapeutics Technologies, which focuses on private by design systems and was responsible for the development of the mobile applications for the Stay Away COVID system. Francisco has a PhD in computer science focused on large-scale data management, and he is also the author of several international publications and collaborates in national international research projects at INESCTEC and University of Minho, such as Safe Cloud, an H2020 project that focused on data privacy challenges in cloud infrastructure. So thank you very much, Francisco, and over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and the kind invitation. I will now share my screen. Okay, I think it's going now, right?
Yes.
Okay. I would also like to thank Anna's presentation because it really paves the way for what I'm going to say and really frames security and privacy as these fundamental sides of the same thing, basically, because in order to provide privacy, we need security. And actually, when preparing this presentation, I had a hard time choosing exactly all the topics I would discuss, because this is a fascinating theme. But I will try to provide some input, some ideas. Some of them are not connected with each other on purpose, so we can have maybe some discussion further on. And I will start by going through a little bit of context, and I'm going fast on this because I think this is more or less known, but the title said data is king because we are producing more data than ever before, and we are actually discovering that we can leverage this data for good stuff, for business intelligence, artificial intelligence, and many services nowadays, and even in healthcare now rely on machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques that we can have because we have a lot of data. And because of this, we are now thinking, okay, if we have more data, we get better results. And this is kind of a limitation of today's technology, but it's how we are working nowadays. So if we have a lot of data, the probability of being able to sort it out and get something out of it is bigger. And that's why so many companies now, so many data companies now are very successful. But this raises some interesting things. One of them is that, and Anna also had some similar quote in her presentation, that now data has become really valuable. And if we think about healthcare data, this is even more true. There are many reasons for this, but I think we are all in the same page when we think that this is kind of the sense nowadays that, okay, data is kind of related with the ability to make good decisions, better decisions, and so on. So basically, if data is so valuable, and if we have, I will use this draw here to represent a database, and this could be an healthcare database, could be something, but it's a database. And we have a lot of data there, and that we know it is sensitive, and maybe it holds some personally identifiable information. And the question is, how do we protect this data? And from now on, I will think about, I will try to think about as a systems person, so as someone that is going to build a system. And many of the things that we can do to protect this data, and also mentioned, and are basically in terms of a perimeter around data. So basically what we are doing is, okay, let's try to protect this data against unauthorized access or loss of data or tampering with data. And we have all these techniques that we can employ, tests, auditing, we can update software, we can add software to protect this data. And actually, I wrote there physical building because actually many of the attacks are social engineered. So sometimes it's easier to get into the building and access the machines than doing a very complex digital attack. So all of this enters here as the protection of this data. And there's a lot of the work done here, and it's extensive. but there's also the other side of the thing, which is we can also do some work on the legal side of things. And here we enter more on the privacy side of things, where, okay, not only we have the technology to protect data, but we also start having some legal frameworks that say, okay, that technology should behave like this, or should have these properties in order to protect the user's data in the end. Because see, there are two levels here: the data that I own as a company and I need to protect, and the security mechanisms that I need to employ in order to not only protect the data itself, but also protect the rights of the user. And this is kind of a second layer. And Europe has been really moving forward on this. And this is very important to follow. So this is all very nice, and we kind of have the technology to do all this. Of course, as Anna said, there are still a lot of shortcomings in this, and we are still getting better. But this is intense work, right? This is really intense work. The thing is, and this is where it gets more interesting, is that real systems are actually distributed. So this kind of is not enough. So the problem is that, okay, we protected data, we kind of employed a lot of stuff in our systems or in our company or in our hospital and so on and so forth. But then there's a lot of other stuff going on, and data is going to all set of places. And why does this happen? Because owning the actual infrastructure is very costly. So the model that came about as known as cloud computing is basically saying, okay, infrastructure and management of infrastructure is a very expensive thing. So let's share resources. And by sharing resources, we optimize and we reduce costs. The problem is, of course, data needs to move to third-party infrastructures. And, you know, problems arise in this context. So whenever you put data outside your jurisdictions or outside your control, there are some very serious privacy, integrity, and security issues going on. Of course, you know, cloud computing companies are doing their personal best to ensure that they also have their perimeters safe, and they are working on this. But in the Safe Cloud project, we also always worked with one very interesting model, which is, okay, let's assume these people are honest, but they are very curious. Okay, so this is also a very interesting thing to think about. Okay, they may be honest, they may be trying to do everything at their power to secure stuff, but they may once in a while peak. And this can be, you know, all the third-party access to private stuff. Maybe it is a government, or it is some auditing company. We all heard the news about all these kinds of things. And of course, there's still the possibility of hackers and unauthorized access for some kind of breach. So here, the question is, okay, how can we solve this problem? And there are many things we can do. Okay, we can tokenize data, anonymize data, encrypt data, and so on. But at the core of all the techniques, and we could be here discussing each one of them, which has different attack models and different purposes. But at the core of each approach, there's this notion that also Anna underlined of the point of trust. So basically, the main decision is, where do I put my trust? And after I decide on this, I can think about the technologies and techniques involved in order to secure my data. And most of the times, this involves having a trusted place, some transformation of the data towards an untrusted site. The simplest thing is, okay, if I want to read a very sensitive document, for instance, let's say my healthcare records. Maybe the doctor, when he accesses my healthcare data in his computer, he will read it. So it will be in a trusted environment because the doctor has access to it. But outside that trusted environment, the data should be closed and encrypted. And that's the data transformation I'm talking about here. So the major decision here is, where do I put this trust point? Is it within my infrastructure? Is in a cloud environment in which I trust? Is it in a third-party company that handles all my IT infrastructure and so on? And in healthcare, this is kind of a huge deal, because in healthcare you have a lot of technology providers, a lot of companies working on technology, and a lot of sometimes rushed design and implementation of systems. Moving on, I would frame all this discussion in this kind of compromise. So basically, depending on that point of trust, you can either move the system towards data privacy, data security, towards the user or the owner of the data, or data processing. Why do I put data processing here? Because the thing is, if I want to extract information from data, I need to process this data. And if I secure it, if I encrypt it, if I hide it, I cannot process it. So you have a very tough compromise between the usability of data and the convenience of having a lot of data and ensuring its privacy and security. For instance, let's say that we own a hospital and we have all data from these patients, and we want to do and run some tests over the data to extrapolate some knowledge. If we don't have the infrastructure to do it in-house, we are going to have to give this data away to some company that will run all the algorithms, all the learning processes. And if we handle the data in its entirety, maybe we'll get perfect results. But we will incur in very, very severe privacy issues. If we anonymize data, if we kind of hide some of the data, if we encrypt some parts of data and maybe only maintain some of the properties or the original properties of the data, maybe we will get some results, but we won't compromise privacy entirely. So this is a very, very interesting compromise to think about. Just to give you an illustrative example, typically we use GPS systems to move around, and what we want to do in practice is, okay, please let me know which is the best path from moving from place A to place B, right? But in the meantime, we are actually sharing all the pointers, all the places we've been in that process. And this is very disproportional, right? It shouldn't be, I shouldn't have to share my location all the time just to get from point A to point B, okay? Now, picking up also on the presentation from Anna, talking about contact tracing, I would also want to briefly go through the Stay With COVID app as an example, as an healthcare example applied in this kind of compromise. And basically, this is a very good example because the compromise here was very constrained by the fact that we wanted to ensure privacy. And if we see this simple graph here, we see that we are pushing it towards privacy, and what we are giving up, data analysis. So basically, the Stay Away COVID system does not have any data to where from which we could learn. And look, this could be actually very helpful if we could study how the disease was moving around and so on. This could be very, very important for infectious disease and doctors and so on, but it would cost the users its privacy, and this could not be done in this system. So this is a very clear compromise between the ability to do stuff and privacy. And here it was a very clear choice, towards privacy. And that's why the app doesn't have, any login. There is no data collected. It doesn't use geographic location. It doesn't use Wi-Fi, any other information related to the user. It always uses a decentralized approach. And matches are actually done in device and never leave the device itself. So only the user has the actual information from a potential risky contact. Okay, so we have these basically two worlds of privacy and data processing. We are thinking about building these systems. And I talked about the cloud computing and databases and so on. And probably some of you are thinking, well, but we are talking about anti-tampering, we are talking about privacy, we are talking about trust. But what about blockchain? What about blockchain? Doesn't this thing solve all of our problems and all the world's problems? Isn't this distributed? Isn't this kind of a writing in stone, immutable system? Isn't it trustless? And I put it in italic, and we'll see it why in a minute. Isn't this the panacea, right? Why doesn't blockchain solve our problems? And I would like to take a couple of minutes looking through this because I think it's important, and I think blockchain can solve some problems, but it won't solve all the problems. And I will try to explain why. So basically, the problem blockchain and the most interesting problem this technology solves is the problem that in computer science we call consensus, or the agreement between different processes. So let's say that we are a bank. So we are a bank and we have this information about the user. So we have their name and the amount they hold in each account. So if we want to do some transactions, since we are hold all the data, we can just move amounts around and receive transfer requests from A to B and so on. The problem is, okay, but if we are A and B and we don't trust the bank, how can we deal with each other? Okay, let's transform the bank into a number of users, so entities or multiple banks, okay? And now we want to deal with each other, we want to transact with each other, but without having to trust one another. So basically, if I say I want to transfer a certain amount from A to B, everyone should agree that is possible. So I have that money to do it, and that I just do it once, right? I cannot do it twice because that would be double spending. So what the blockchain actually does, and this is of course very simplified, but what it does is I will replicate the bank throughout everybody. So from now on, if I want to make a transfer, I will propagate that request to everybody. And since everybody has the information to verify it, everybody will verify it and say, okay, it's from A to B, 5 of amount, this is possible, so I will validate and say it's okay. And the magic behind the blockchain technology and what we have today is that we can do this with an arbitrary number of participants, which previously could be done at smaller scale. And since everybody can verify this situation, we can progress, okay? And everybody will agree at the result of this transaction, and we can move forward. And that's why it is an immutable ledger, and that's why it's distributed. So even if some of these nodes are malicious, in the end, there are enough copies of the system, and there is enough history of the system in the entire distributed system that will ensure that data cannot be tampered with and cannot be changed. And basically, this is done through kind of a majority. So this is kind of a majority system. The problem is that everyone has access to the data, so this is not entirely private, even if some blockchains may be permission, so some people will have access and others won't. But it's ideal for transaction, but there is no actual link from this distributed ledger to the physical world, for instance. So in a supply chain, we still need to be able to verify based on past information, the new information that is being added, and so on. So blockchain is a very nice thing. It can solve many problems, but not every problem. And my main goal with this discussion with both the first part of the presentation and this is that no size fits all. And actually, coincidentally, I will use the same sentence that Anna used in the presentation. Here we can see that there are compromises between privacy and processing, security, accessibility, to blockchain or not to blockchain. This is a very nice question. Okay, and when building a system, you should take this into account. But mostly to trust or not to trust, which we didn't agree on this, or we didn't prepare it like this. But it is the most important thing: is to trust or not to trust, or where to trust. And I will finish here, and I will thank you. I hope it was useful. Thank you.
So thank you, Francisco. I'm sure there will be questions in the end, but let's move now to the next presentation. We'll have time for discussion in the end. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation as well. So moving to the last presentation of this afternoon, it's my pleasure to introduce Bika and Yo. They are the co-founders and chief compliance officers at Extra Horizon and FibriCheck, two projects that have arisen from Copium, a company which develops medical software solutions for the digital health space. So FibriCheck is an AI-based PPG analysis solution to detect heart rhythm disorders using smartphones or smartwatches, and makes use of the Extra Horizon solution, which is a scalable medical backend solution that offers faster time to market and time to regulatory for third parties. So today they will close this first part of the webinar by presenting their case study. So thank you for sharing your experience, and the screen is yours.
Okay, let's see. Does everybody see my slides?
Yes.
All right. So thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. We hope to take you in the next 15 to 20 minutes towards our experiences and what we have done in the past related to cybersecurity, privacy, but also regulatory. So as indicated, I'm Bika, founded Compium together with Yo in 2014. Initially, we had only one product, which was FibriCheck, a certified digital health application to detect for cardiac arrhythmias. But since 1 year, we added an additional business unit, which is Extra Horizon, which is actually a medical backend as a service that substantially de-risks the investment for other companies to build their own secure medical device, while actually additionally providing them with the benefits to go to the market at least a year faster. But let us kickstart from the beginning. When we look to the evolution of mankind, I believe this could be a representation of the current situation. And when we take a closer look to the evolution of technology in the last decade, we notice revolutionary changes. Just see the invention of the iPhone goes actually less than 15 years back. And of course, initially, we used this device for simple functions like going on the internet, texting, mailing, calling, or just like for taking pictures. But we quickly started to realize that the potential of this technology is substantially bigger, because with new versions of smartphones, the sensors were improved, new sensors were added, and also the processing capacity of the devices improved. And actually, all these changes also was the kickstart of FibriCheck. As back in 2013, we started to imagine, what if you could transform a commercial device like a smartphone into a medical device to timely detect for cardiac arrhythmias, thereby just using the commercial device, no other hardware needed. And on top of that, securely sending all data generated by this device to physicians for follow-up. And of course, we all know that technology didn't stop with the smartphone. Today, there is an array of tools that can monitor parameters of the human body to support people in different ways, ranging from sport practice, optimizations over disease management, to assisted living as well. And a new and emerging area that is built on top of this technology evolution is the era of digital therapeutics. In this way, technologies are actually no longer only used for monitoring and management, but could even bridge the gap towards treatment. So just imagine that your phone is actually treating you for a condition that you have. But still, I mean, despite the rapid evolvement of technology, certainly until pre-COVID, this was kind of a common picture. Like, you're sitting in the waiting room of a doctor, killing the time on a smartphone, and pondering the question, like, why can't going to the doctor be like this? Especially since we all know that all other industries have been completely digitally revolutionized, except for the healthcare one. But with the start of the pandemic, we really felt as like entrepreneurs in these fields that something changed. I mean, for me, it's really like that healthcare was more than 10 years pregnant of a baby called Digital Health and gave birth to a C-section just during the COVID pandemic. As COVID really required different healthcare systems, physicians to adopt digital applications. And they learned actually that some of their prejudices around digital health, around safety, were incorrect. So you really see that the clinical adoption started to increase. But of course, this also came and comes with very big challenges, as the combination of sensitivity in data and the decentralization processing adds to the complexity. I mean, you don't need to solely assure that the device is working properly from a clinical perspective, but also from a security and privacy perspective. And regulators are already working on these concepts, as for example, in the FDA approval process, there are specific sections on cybersecurity controls. But what we may not forget, of the 2.2 million apps today, there are only 160 that are FDA approved. And FibriCheck is actually one of them. We were one of the first FDA approved mobile health applications. And how FibriCheck's work is actually like, to start using the application, users need to create an account, thereby providing some basic information. And then people can start measuring. Measuring is as simple as putting the finger on the camera or wearing a smartwatch in case with smartwatch monitoring. But thereby, of course, we generate additional data, sensitive data. And on top, we ask users then to provide additional information related to symptoms, related to their activity level, as actually this supports us in the analysis of their data, but of course adds towards the sensitivity data that we generate and process. So today, FibriCheck is actually a very complex connected ecosystem that supports over 3,000 different devices. The system itself as a whole, so each and every component, is certified today in Europe, US, Australia, Middle East, and used by over 600,000 people. And actually, from a clinical perspective, really accepted in the medical world, as over 3,000 professional users use FibriCheck in their practice across different geographies. But from a technical perspective, we also needed to assure that all our applications are able to are flexible to operate securely across multiple business models in a complex digital health environment. And here, our medical cloud infrastructure is really our backbone and plays a crucial role to do this securely. So at the start, like back in 2014, 15, our FibriCheck requirement list was extensive. I mean, we knew we needed to handle medical and personal data in a safe way. We knew data would come from different resources, whether it were like different array of smartphones, but across the years also other wearables. And we knew that our software needed to be updated at all times with speedy recovery possibilities. So from a technical feature list, our requirements were like, okay, we need to be scalable in load and functionality, and more, our loads are unpredictable because literally sometimes we onboard 20,000 people overnight. As a digital health market is young, it was clear from the beginning that digital healthcare systems required different approaches. So we wanted a solution with minimal technical debt and legacy that is quickly to adapt. But our infrastructure also needed to be able to handle complex and evolving data formats and host specific AI algorithms with additional layers like for labeling, flagging, segmenting. And on top of all these, digital, of course, means going international because that's what we all want to do. We don't want to limit to one country. So we knew we had to comply to a variety of privacy, security, and regulatory requirements that are often not the same across countries. But for us, as such, it was clear from the beginning. A safe and digital health application needs a fine balance between three aspects: regulatory, cybersecurity, and privacy. So actually, with a lot of motivation, we kickstarted for a very long process, taking several years. And I would say, unfortunately, we literally needed to do everything ourselves because we were quite early in the market and we didn't find any alternatives to support us on the market. And our first focus has been on the regulatory component, as it was really clear that from the start, it was clear that given the intended use, FibriCheck would classify as a medical device coming with extensive requirements. Very concrete, our software is classified as a Class 2A medical device, implying that it needs to be externally reviewed by notified bodies to verify its compliance to internal standards so that we ensure that we can operate safe and secure. But prior to being certified, as a company, we first needed to implement a quality management system to demonstrate that actually we are a trusted company to develop medical devices and we can do this securely. And of course, still today, our QMS system is audited regularly, at least once a year. So to keep ensuring that we can make medical devices in a safe, qualitative, and secure way. The second aspect is, of course, we need to approve the product itself. And this evidence demonstrates that our application actually does what it claims and that it's safe to use. So we need to show how it is built, verified, tested, validated, and all others in real life. And this goes so far beyond clinical. The FDA, for example, has already specific cybersecurity elements in its guidance and also software documentation requirements. And actually, with respect to the building of medical software, there is like a lot of guidance and best practices, and we can only recommend these. But it's clear that one of the most important guidance documents for digital health is the IEC 62304. And these standards extensively describe the processes and information that needs to be made available before, during, and after the product. And the documentation requirements are very, very, very extensive. But actually they support in building secure software. And one thing actually for us is clear: to develop secure medical software, you need health engineers, and they are really rare to find. And I guess this picture might say it all. This is our true FDA documentation of the first version of FibriCheck. So never underestimate the technical part, as everything and every piece needs to be documented properly when you want to do it safe and secure. But of course, as indicated, it's not only about regulatory, and there are a lot of interbalances between regulatory, privacy, and cybersecurity. So the second element on our list was cybersecurity, an area that we know, of course, today gets substantially more attention. Like, take, for example, reimbursement processes. I suppose you all know the recent DiGA process in Germany. If you go through the DiGA process, you will notice that regulatory approval is just like a first requirement, like it needs to be done. But the majority of the questions are all related to security and the safe treatment of personal data. And the complexity is that actually each country has like its own focus points, and it's not the same in each country. Like in the Netherlands, we have the NEN standards. In the UK, we have DPEG, DPST, Cyber Essential Plus, and so on and so on. And not only for the reimbursement, all these cybersecurity elements are very important. Also for collaborations with blue chip companies. Like with FibriCheck, we have done multiple collaborations with blue chip companies, both insurance, pharma, medtech. And to get to a collaboration, you always need to go to tons and tons of question lists. And the majority of them today, you really feel the shift is all related to security and privacy. It's truly all about logging, monitoring, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, storage, encryption, and so on and so on. And it's not about complying and providing answers like they want to hear it, because you feel them moving now. They want to see the proof, they want to see the pen test, they want to see the ethical hacking test, and so on and so on. So as an organization, we have done like multiple steps to assure or maximally assure that we can handle secure. So first, it was all about like the asset information, like to understand where the gaps as well might be, like what information do we collect? Why are we collecting them? Are we ensuring that they are properly protected? Can we do better and stuff like that? Of course, there is like a whole access control element to assure that only people that should have access to information have access. State-of-the-art encryptions, I mean, that's a standard element with additional encryption layers, of course, for sensitive data. You need to protect the buildings, but we also need, for example, processes to cover how we handle malware, or how logging and alerting is done, how backups are provided. And of course, I mean, it was important to think about the worst case scenario, like what if things go south? I mean, this can always happen, and we need to ensure that everybody knows at that point in time what to do so that the business is only limitedly affected. Today, our company is like ISO certified, both on a FibriCheck and Extra Horizon side. And this standard really helped us actually in the implementation of an information security management system, and actually to assure that security by design came truly in the DNA of our company. So that with everything we do, with every line code we write, security is taken into consideration. But of course, it doesn't stop at implementation of an information security management system. I mean, as part of it, we needed to do like regular pen testings, ethical hackings, testing of backups, testing of business continuity, to prove that actually what we say actually works. And this is not something which is like logical to do. I mean, it's really something where you need to take a lot of time for, and it's also often required for reimbursement and collabs with blue chip companies. And the last element, besides regulatory and security, is of course the privacy pillar, which again intersects a lot with the other topics. But some elements that we wanted to sort out, as it was quite complex on our side. The first one was consent management. I mean, of course, it is logical to ask for people's explicit consent to process their sensitive data. But having a technical system that assures that data is only used with the right consents, where people, of course, can individually revoke a specific consent, is sometimes a little bit more complex. Another element is pseudonymization. Like, it was such an important asset that we wanted to assure that we build our technical system as such that it supported pseudonymization, or what I like to call local anonymization. And the third one was localization of data. I mean, this is something that pops up regularly because different countries want the data to be processed in their region. And this implies that technical systems need to be able to do multiple region setups and do it fast. So actually, when people ask us, like, how do you define a secure application, or how do you build a digital health application that it's safe? We believe it's way more than just cybersecurity. We truly believe it's a combination of different aspects. It's about quality by design, it's about security by design, and it's about privacy by design. Because prevention is key. I mean, what we want is, of course, that personal data is treated in a secure way, and on the other hand, optimally used for further research purposes. And for me, like, there is no quick fix. I mean, in my experience, it often just takes a lot of time, and a lot of time translates often in a lot of money. And if you see like how this resulted for FibriCheck, the medical backend cloud infrastructure of FibriCheck is currently a 7,000 documentation pages microservices architecture, which each component having its own database. It's deployed as infrastructure as a code with customizable APIs. Of course, the system is designed to scale and meets the most stringent requirements of regulatory cybersecurity and data privacy. So what's in there? I mean, it's like secure coding with different branch setups and vulnerability scanning on each line of code. It's about correct versioning. It's about a completely internal developed access control system with rights and roles so that we could set up different business models. Logging of all actions and alerting. I mean, a simple requirement of certainly HIPAA, but also GDPR. State-of-the-art encryptions, pseudonymizations, separation of sensitive data from user data, from profile data, multi-region setup. We have intrusion detection and prevention systems, different backup management possibilities, and so on. And on top of it, the system is made as such that, of course, it's built according to the IEC 62304 because it's a requirement for medical device software. But the system itself is also certified both according to the ISO 27001, which is like information security management system, but also according to the ISO 27701, which is the privacy security management system. And actually, we made Extra Horizon abstract from FibriCheck from the start. And although it might have not been our intention in the past, it is clear that it allows us to support other companies like in building and maintaining their medical cloud infrastructure by simply clicking in as a critical supplier in their QMS system, reducing their time to market by, let's say, 80%. So how you need to see this is Extra Horizon is actually an additional layer on commercial cloud providers, but there is no shared Extra Horizon infrastructure between our customers. So for each and every customer, an own specific Extra Horizon cluster is deployed. So to avoid any sharing of data by definition, code or functionality with others. And as far as we know, this is quite a unique element. And as such, this also allows companies to configure Extra Horizon components just like they want. Like they have endless possibilities in creating any type of medical software for any type of user or customer. And of course, data and configuration is like the IP of our customers, while we take the responsibility of a lot of cybersecurity and privacy elements. Maybe to conclude, we started actually offering our Extra Horizon infrastructure only quite recently, as we got so many questions during the COVID pandemic, as certainly in the IVD space, we saw that it was going completely digital, where a digital medical infrastructure was needed for certainly for the self-test and to do this in a secure and safe way. Startups also now find us because they know we understand their pain because we went through ourselves, and we know that all they want is to bring their product as a market as quickly as possible. So hope our story was kind of a motivation, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Vic. I think this was an amazing end to the different presentations on seeing on practice. A lot of these concepts are put together in the health software, because this is the main topic of the session. And now I'll invite you all for a small conversation about the different points that you raised. And let me open the stage with initial question, more fundamental question, or philosophical, let's say, that is, how do you define how much is enough on the cybersecurity? I think we can start with you, Vic, in the way that you pointed a really extensive things that you need to do, but how do you define what else you probably are not doing that you could do to make this 100% secure, but then balancing what Francisco probably said, that there is always a balance between security measures and, of course, usability of the app. So how do you define how enough is enough?
For us, it's always about a tariff like risk analysis on all the cyber security elements. I mean, before we start, we look at all the risks that are like linked to, for example, a new feature or a new design or whatsoever. And then for the different risks, we look at the impact and stuff like that. And based on that, we make an analysis to decide like, okay, this risk is really so small, and even in case it would happen, the consequences would be so limited that we are prepared, I would say, to take the risk. But it's indeed true, you can never be 100% safe and secure. You can only do your best, like, to be as close as possible, with reasonable investments, of course.
And Francisco, from your side,
well, I agree with the risk assessment thing. I would also add enough is enough in terms of the focus you're having on the feature or the product you are building. So I think the problem here is sometimes you are building something for the user, and you think, oh, it would be nice if I could add this, and that. Okay, and you lose that focus, and you start gathering more data, and you start going around what you really wanted in the first place. So I would say that if you have a very clear idea, very focused idea on what you are building, then you can find that line of technology that you need to employ. Another discussion could be, okay, I will go as far as regulation or compliance requires me to go. And this is a very interesting discussion, because in some cases you can be compliant without even being at the state-of-the-art technology for security. So, and this kind of raises a different question, which is being compliant enough, or are we focusing on providing that feature for the user in a really state-of-the-art, private and secure way? And that would be my line, right? That would be my line, more than just the compliance. Although compliance helps you in the path, as BK also said.
If I may, Miguel, I want to add here, I'm like 100% agreeing with Francisco, and it's really not only about compliance, it's really about taking the extra mile. As in the end, I mean, what we see is that regulatory is like following the reality. So it's better to work up front, because at a certain point in time, otherwise you might have problems. And if from a regulatory or compliance perspective, and on the other hand, if something truly happens, I mean, your how do you say it, your image is so, yeah, how do you say it in complete, I think you know what I mean, like your branding image, I mean, it's exactly, your reputation is gone. So it's always important to stay even ahead of everything which is required by regulatory cybersecurity or privacy regulators.
And on your side, you talk a lot about the trust parts. You work quite closely to a hospital.
Yes.
So you have probably the other side, not the ones that try to build things only, but also those that will be the users.
Yes.
How enough is enough? Because in the end, you have this probably difficult. You need to have something to fight COVID. You need to have some of this.
Exactly.
how enough is enough, that things that you can accept that are not properly built or fully taught or fully developed, or what is the line that you can draw that between what is actually using it for the care of patients?
Yes, that's a very good question, which goes exactly to the point that we want to try to keep this balance. Because for me, as a cybersecurity specialist, there's not enough. There's never enough, right? Because it will be never enough. There's no 100%. So there's no point there. That's a never-ending story. So let's not go there. But for the users, I mean, we need to actually find this balance. We cannot just provide enough security that then they cannot do anything with it, which is the danger, especially in healthcare. If something stops you from doing your work, either they don't use it or they just lots of problems start to happen. And this cannot be a case, right? It's like in normal life. I mean, there's always a risk. I agree with the risk assessment or risk management in this case to be the complete version of everything. So we need to make sure, okay, how much risk can we take on? What are the implications? But then we do this in our everyday lives, right? When we get out of the door, when we get out of our beds, we need to have this sort of uncertainty always, all the time. So this balance needs to be found, I think, within the main goals of the technology that we want to put there. So which technology is different, it will be used by different people, the targets are different. So it's like, okay, what we want to achieve, can we go a bit higher, can we go a bit less? But we need to, it's a very variety of many different factors that need to be taken into account. We cannot, I don't think we cannot put in a scale of enough or not enough, because in the end it's never enough, right? We can always go higher, otherwise we wouldn't be here trying to make things better and bigger. So yeah, that's what I want to say in this case. So the main goal is the user. We need to make sure that it is useful for them, and in the end, if we need to, like I said, give back some privacy, I mean, that's the exchange we need to make. But obviously we need to control that and make sure that still it is useful. Otherwise there's no point in having a very secure system buried under the earth, right? The tree or something like that.
Vic, do you want to add anything? No, it's not clear. So I have another question that follows a little bit on this one, but goes in the more practical sides of if you are a startup, if you are a small group of researchers going out from university with some kind of technology, where to start? Because this is quite overwhelming probably for the majority of people. I think, Vic, what you're describing is more overwhelming for someone doing a medical device when they discover that they need to do much more things just because they are digital, when they probably thought that it was the opposite. So where to start? Where do you advise someone to start with this process on making sure that, as Vic mentioned, be secure by design, privacy by design, quality by design? How should you start as a small, with small resources as probably a beginning startup? And I don't know if you want to share a little bit, start on your slides, or Francisco.
Well, I can maybe talk about the technology part of it, because it's there are a lot of stuff there. From the technology part of it, I would just suggest engaging in conversation with both other companies working on the area, but also maybe engaging in some conversation with the academic world as well, because in this kind of no size fits all reasoning, a specific problem might be already solved, and talking with people will really fasten your process, or it could be a very new and interesting problem, and it's good to have people that really are thinking on the edge of knowledge and the edge of what we are having as technologists. So I would for sure try to engage and in the conversation with other people, with engineers, because one thing that is really bad for a startup is that if you don't think one or two things from the beginning, you may end up building a system that will need to be rebuilt a bunch of times. I'm not talking about iteration, because iteration always happens, but rebuilding systems in a fast growing company may be very, very costly. So there are a couple of things that, think through them when you're building the system from day one. Try to use off-the-shelf stuff. Try to engage in conversation with people that already designed those systems, because it will help you save a lot of time in the further ahead. Yeah.
Vic, do you want to add?
I can only agree with what Francisco is stated. It's like thinking 2 steps ahead. What we also advise is, a lot of times when we talk with startups, like based on our experience with Fibricheck, you feel that they want to do this. I mean, typically it helps to make like one a little bit more limited case, also with minimum requirements with respect to safety, security, and so on, and then like improve and extend. But as Francisco is stating, like taking all the others already in the back into consideration when building the system and the infrastructure, to assure that you don't need to rebuild the whole infrastructure from scratch, as this will take time, and it's typically not something that investors like to see, as it is not truly adding value.
Anna, we have here a question from the Anna Portela, or actually more a comment about the evolving risks and threats with new ideas. Since you work a lot on the research side of cybersecurity, how do you and how should people be ahead of the future, or ahead of what's coming new? Because we didn't discuss here, for instance, the quantum computing and this kind of thing that probably make every systems unsafe.
Well, I can talk about my experience in sort of how we manage the data now with the research projects. Before 2018, we didn't have GDPR. We had some sort of regulation, which was not very prone to have a high fees, let's say. The legislation was there already, but people actually ignored it. And now with the extensive fees, they really need to make something about it. And I think it's very good to do that. So in order to start some sort of project, we need to make sure that we have the regulation in our site. We have to, it's mandatory. So we need to have something, we have to have some knowledge, or someone that knows about what are the main requirements, that in this case, GDPR or any other legislation, depending on the jurisdiction, what you're building and so on, it needs to be there. After that, you need to make sure that you know exactly what kind of project you're doing. So it's not only sometimes the data that you're gathering in your device, but also you're using your collaborators' data, your team's data. You need to consider every aspect. What data are you collecting? What data are you processing? And you need to make sure to do that homework beforehand. Hopefully, when you're doing your application to a research project, for example, you already know what kind of data you're collecting, what needs protection, at least in your mind. You know more or less what you need to have there. And then obviously you cannot be aware of every single risk or every single detail or every single attack that it is going to happen. But I've been for a few years now in this, and I know that there are really not new attacks. There may be new technology or new devices or not new tools to perform the same attacks. It's basically stealing some information or disrupting some services. So before IT existed, these attacks were there also, right? So the baseline is there. So it's about, the risks are mainly in the new technologies that are there and can be developed. But obviously we need to understand them, how they work, and we need to make sure we have the appropriate technology to defend against them. But in the end, all the main goals, we know what they are. So in the end, we need to understand how people act, how people influence each other. And obviously we need to understand better the technologies that come from that. So I can use the same technologies to do bad, like with the criminals. I can do the same to defend ourselves and to provide a lot of potential that they have and fulfill many things that we have been doing these past years, right? We have evolving a lot in many different areas, especially in healthcare. And this needs to continue. We should not be afraid of the attackers, because they will always be there, and we need to make sure we are prepared. I mean, preparation and prevention, like Vika said, are the main issues. Thank you.
Vika, Francisco, you want to add anything here on this future proof of cybersecurity or?
Well, it's a very interesting topic, and of course, you're touching the quantum stuff. That's why we need universities and we need research, because we have already a lot of work on that, and we already have quantum proof cryptography coming out and all kinds of things. So that's why scientific research, exploration, funding for sometimes crazy ideas is very important, because that's what allows us to be one step ahead of what's coming as a practical and deployed technology. Even these technologies that come up in an emergency situation like contact tracing, they are not like brand new ideas that suddenly they were implemented. No, these are the results of years and years of research of people that probably didn't know that this could be applied in a real,
This used to be done manually, so
exactly. So this is kind of interesting to see that science had these ideas. Okay, maybe we could do this digitally like this and like that, but nobody even thought that there will be a world pandemic where we could test this, right? So that's my key point on future-proof technology or future-proof cryptography and security. We need to be one step ahead, because people trying to attack will always have the incentive, right? And people defending probably don't have the same incentive.
Maybe I can just mention quickly that we need probably to focus on ethical hacking. So maybe there we can be ahead, right? So maybe we can have teams that are act like criminals, but for the good, and then maybe they can be more prepared and also more aware of what things that can be done with the new technology. So maybe we can bet on that.
On the side of exploration, how do you deal with this? Because your product needs to be always being updated to be ready for the future. So I don't know if Vic or Joe.
It's about, I would say, continuous monitoring and continuous improvement. As Anna is indicated, we do have ethical hackers that are trying to go into the system, look at the spots that need improvements, and as such we try to always stay ahead of the curve. And I think also going back to your initial question, this probably makes it a little bit more challenging for new startups than it was for us back in 2014. I think our playing field and the levels at that point in time were a little bit lower. I also feel it when we have collaborations with other companies, that the requirements from the very beginning towards cybersecurity and privacy are really at a completely different level than what they were back in 2014, 15. But of course, this is also linked to the fact that technology evolved and that way more is possible. So I think on our side, pen testing and ethical hackings certainly help.
Okay, so we are running out of time. So thank you all for joining here. I'll pass the word to Patricia also to some final words on our behalf. But thank you again for joining for this session, this interesting and ongoing discussions that cybersecurity will be always present as a discussion more and more as we move more into digital health. Even those solutions that are not medical devices, everything, now we are facing this challenge of cybersecurity that becomes even from the US. Joe Biden, the issue with Russia, for instance, the main topic of the agenda is cybersecurity. So it's quite interesting how now the politics are being disputed on the digital side also. So Patricia, some last words on your side?
Yeah, just before we close the webinar, I'd like to thank once again the speakers and also the attendees of the webinar. I hope it was an informative session for everyone. So for the attendees, I invite you to check the upcoming webinars of this series at healthportugal.com, or by using the QR code on the screen, or just follow us through the Health Cluster Portugal's LinkedIn or Twitter accounts. So next Tuesday, we'll have a webinar dedicated to innovation procurement in healthcare. So if this is a topic of your interest, just sign up and join us. So have a nice week and nice afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you.